I loved a man who was never truly present, even when he was right beside me. For years, I cried in the bathroom with the faucet running so he wouldn't hear me. Not because he hit me, not because he screamed, but because he simply didn't see me. And then, one winter morning, he grabbed a backpack, climbed a mountain, and came back as a person I had never known before. What happened up on that peak changed not only him, it changed everything I believed about love, about men, and about myself.
If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, there's an ebook in the description that talks exactly about this.
Elena had a smile that fooled everyone. In family photos, she always appeared radiant, with her hair pulled back and her eyes bright. People would look at her and think, "What a happy woman! What a beautiful home!" But no one saw what was behind that smile. No one knew that every night, when the lights went out, Elena would lie down next to her husband and feel a cold that had nothing to do with winter. A cold that came from within, from that invisible space that had formed between them so slowly that neither of them knew exactly when it had begun. Marcos and Elena had been married for 11 years. 11 years of remembered birthdays, paid bills, children driven to school, dinners prepared with care. 11 years of a life that, seen from the outside, looked perfect. But a perfect life is not always a fulfilling one. Marcos was a good man. Elena knew that. He didn't drink, didn't lie, didn't raise his voice. He worked hard, came home, ate in silence, watched television, and fell asleep. And the next day, the same. And the day after, the same. Elena had tried to talk to him many times. She would say, "Marcos, I feel like we are losing each other." And he would look at her with those tired eyes, nod slightly, and say, "I'm fine, Elena. I'm just tired." Always tired, always absent, always somewhere else. And the most painful part wasn't the silence. The most painful part was that Elena still loved him. She kept waiting for something at some point to change. She kept watching him sleep at night and wondering if the man she had once known, that man who made her laugh until 3 a.m, who wrote her letters by hand, who looked at her as if she were the most valuable thing in the world, still existed somewhere inside that silent body, or if he had simply disappeared forever. Everything started to fall apart on a Tuesday night. An ordinary Tuesday. No special date, no apparent reason. Elena had prepared dinner with more care than usual. She had lit candles on the table, cooked Marcos's favorite meal, and asked her mother to stay with the children. She wanted a night just for the two of them, a night to remember that they were still more than just housemates. When Marcos arrived and saw the table, he said nothing. He sat down, looked at his plate, and pulled out his phone. Elena watched him from the kitchen. She felt something inside her tighten, like a rope that has been pulled too tight for too long and is on the verge of snapping. She sat down across from him, asked how his day had been. He answered in monosyllables, without lifting his eyes from the screen. Then Elena, with a calm but trembling voice, said, "Marcos, can you look at me, please?" He raised his eyes. He looked at her, but he didn't see her. There was an enormous difference between the two things, and Elena knew it very well. "What's wrong?" he asked, in that tone of someone who expects the problem to be small and easy to fix. "What's wrong is that I am right here," Elena said. "What's wrong is that I've been trying to connect with you for weeks, and I feel like I'm talking to a wall. I feel lonely, Marcos, completely lonely, and the worst part is that I'm sitting right in front of you." There was a long silence. Marcos put his phone down on the table. He rubbed his face with both hands, and then he said something Elena would never forget. "I don't know what you want me to do, Elena. I'm here, aren't I? I work every single day for this family. What else do you need?" Those words fell on her like stones. What else do you need? As if love were a bill to be paid, as if emotional presence were a luxury she had no right to ask for. Elena didn't respond. She stood up slowly, blew out the candles, and went to the bathroom. She turned on the faucet, and she cried. She cried the way she had been wanting to cry for months, with her whole body, with that kind of crying that makes no sound but shakes everything on the inside. And as the water ran, she looked at herself in the mirror and asked herself a question that terrified her. How long am I going to keep waiting for a man who no longer knows how to love me?
The months that followed were the longest of Elena's life. There were no big fights, no slamming doors or cruel words, just that dense, heavy silence that filled every corner of the house like invisible smoke. Elena learned to live on autopilot. She would wake up, make breakfast, drive the children to school, go to work, come home, cook dinner, put the children to bed, and climb into bed next to a man who turned his back to her before she even turned off the light. Night after night, week after week. There were moments when Elena would watch him from a distance, while he read the newspaper or watched the game or laughed with a friend on the phone, and feel something strange. A mixture of love and sadness so profound that it was hard to breathe. Because he did know how to laugh. He did know how to be present. Just not with her. One Sunday, her friend Carla came to visit. The two of them had coffee while the children played in the garden, and Carla, who had known her since childhood, looked her straight in the eyes and said, without hesitation, "Elena, when was the last time you were truly happy?" Elena opened her mouth to answer and couldn't find the answer. She searched her memory, searched for a recent moment of genuine happiness, a moment when she had felt loved, seen, chosen, and found nothing. She only found old memories, memories of when everything was different, of when Marcos called her just to hear her voice, of when he held her hand for no reason at all, of when he said, "Thank you for being here," as if her presence were a gift. What had happened to that man? Where had he gone? That night, after Carla left, Elena did something she hadn't done in a long time. She took out her old journal, that blue notebook she kept in the drawer of her nightstand, and started to write. She wrote everything she couldn't say out loud. She wrote about the fear, about the loneliness, about the strange guilt she felt, as if somehow she were responsible for the distance between them. About the nights when she stared at the ceiling and wondered if the problem was her, if perhaps she wasn't enough, if perhaps she had done something wrong without knowing it. And at the bottom of the page, she wrote a single sentence, a sentence she underlined twice with a trembling hand. "I don't want to keep being invisible to the man who promised to always see me." She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and listened to Marcos breathing peacefully beside her, a man who slept without knowing that his wife was slowly fading, like a forgotten candle burning out in an empty room. It was a night in November when Elena made the most difficult decision of her life. Outside, it was raining, one of those heavy downpours that beat against the windows and make the world feel smaller, more enclosed, more inevitable. The children were asleep. The house was silent. Elena was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea between her hands. She had been lost in thought for so long that she had forgotten to drink it, when Marcos walked in, opened the refrigerator, took out some water, and turned to go back to the bedroom. He didn't even look at her. He walked right past her as if she were part of the furniture. And in that moment, something inside Elena broke completely. It wasn't a loud breaking. It wasn't a scream or a sob. It was something much quieter and much more devastating. It was the sound of a woman who finally stops waiting. She stood up,
walked to the bedroom, and with a calm voice, with that strange stillness that only comes when there is nothing left to lose, she said, "Marcos, I need us to talk. Tonight. Right now." He sat down on the edge of the bed, looked at her with eyes half closed from sleep and habit. Elena took a deep breath and spoke. She told him everything. She told him she had spent years feeling invisible. She told him there were nights she cried alone in the bathroom because she didn't want him to hear her. She told him she had searched her memory for the exact moment he had stopped seeing her and couldn't find it, and that scared her more than anything else. She told him she loved him, that she still loved him, but that love alone wasn't enough when it only came from one side. And then she said the sentence that had taken her 11 years to speak out loud. "If things don't change, Marcos, I don't know if I can keep going." The silence that followed was the longest of their 11 years together. Marcos looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, Elena saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't anger. It was fear. A genuine, deep fear, like someone who has just realized they're about to lose something they didn't even know they still had. But he didn't speak. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on his knees, staring at the floor. And after an eternal silence, he said only, "I need time to think." Elena nodded, got into bed, turned off the light, and cried in silence, for the last time with the faucet turned off. Because she no longer cared if he heard her. Because she no longer had the strength to hide. That night, as the rain beat against the windows and Marcos sat motionless in the darkness, something invisible but irreversible had shifted between them. A door had opened. Or perhaps a door was about to close forever. 3 days after that night, Elena wasn't expecting. They were having breakfast in silence, that new, different silence, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that still needed to be resolved, when he put his cup down on the table and said, "I'm going away this weekend, alone." Elena looked at him. "Where?" "To the mountain." He paused. "A coworker told me about a trail, 3 days of hiking. No phone, no signal, nothing. Just me and... I don't know. Just me." Elena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to protest, wanted to tell him that running away to a mountain wasn't the solution, that problems don't get solved with long walks, that there were 2 children in that house and 11 years of silence that needed something more than 3 days of fresh air. But there was something in his voice, something different, a small, almost imperceptible crack in that armor of indifference that Marcos had built over the years. So she simply said, "Okay." And on Friday morning, before the children woke up, Marcos put an old backpack in the trunk of the car. Elena came out to say goodbye in her pajamas, with tangled hair and a cup of coffee in her hand. They looked at each other for a moment. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, something important, something he had been carrying inside for a long time. But he only said, "Take care of yourself." And he left. Elena stood in the doorway, watching the red taillights of the car disappear into the morning fog. She felt a strange mixture of emotions she didn't know how to name. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sadness. It was something closer to uncertainty, with a thin thread of hope sewn along the edge. The 3 days that followed were strange. The house felt different without him. Quieter, yes, but also emptier than Elena had expected. She found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. She wondered what he was seeing from the top of that mountain, whether he was thinking of her, whether the silence of nature was telling him something she hadn't been able to tell him with words. On Sunday night, when the children were already asleep, Elena heard the sound of the car in the driveway. She looked out the window.
Marcos got out slowly. His hair was disheveled, his clothes dirty with mud and sweat, and there was an expression on his face that took Elena several seconds to recognize, because it was an expression she hadn't seen in years. It was the expression of a man who had just found something, or, perhaps, of a man who had just found himself. He walked in silence toward her, put his backpack down on the floor, and before Elena could say a single word, Marcos did something completely unexpected. He walked toward her. He took her in his arms, and he held her. Not a quick hug, the kind given out of habit or routine. It was a long, deep, tight embrace, like that of someone who came dangerously close to losing something precious and has just understood in its full weight what that truly means. Elena didn't move at first. Her body was stiff, her arms pressed against her sides, unsure whether to hold on or protect herself. But then she felt something. She felt him trembling. She slowly raised her arms, wrapped them around him, and there, standing in the hallway of their home in silence, the two of them began to cry, without saying a single word, without needing any.
That night, when the crying settled and the two of them sat down on the hallway floor with their backs against the wall, Marcos spoke. He spoke like he had never spoken before, and Elena listened like she had never listened before. "I went up that mountain thinking I needed to escape," he said, his voice hoarse, looking at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "But halfway up, when there was no signal, no noise, nothing left to distract me, I came face to face with something I'd been running from for years." Elena said nothing. She just waited. "I came face to face with myself," he paused for a long time, "and I didn't like what I saw." Marcos explained that on the second day, sitting on a rock at the top of the mountain, looking down at the valley below, he had a thought that stopped him cold. He had thought, "If Elena is gone when I get back, I will have deserved it." And that idea, so simple and so brutal, had destroyed something inside him. Because for the first time, he didn't think about everything he did. He didn't think about the bills he paid, the years he worked, the roof over their heads. He thought about everything he didn't do. About the times she reached for him with her eyes and he looked away. About the conversations he cut short without meaning to. About the nights she went to bed with a broken heart and he slept right through it without even noticing. He thought about his own father, and that was when everything came undone. "My father was the same," Marcos said, and his voice broke on that word, same. "He was home every single day. We never lacked for anything, but I grew up not knowing what it felt like to have my father truly look at me, not knowing what it felt like to be asked how I was feeling." He swallowed hard. "And I swore I would never be like him. I swore that when I had a family of my own, I would be truly present." His eyes filled with tears. "And I became exactly him, without realizing it, without wanting it. I became the man I was most afraid of being." Elena felt her chest split open. Because in that moment she understood something she had not been able to understand in 11 years of silence and distance. Marcos hadn't pulled away because he didn't love her. Marcos had pulled away because no one had ever taught him how to stay. He had grown up in a house where men didn't talk about what they felt, where love was shown through physical presence and financial support, but never through words, never through eye contact, never through that kind of emotional intimacy that Elena needed so deeply. It wasn't indifference. It was an old, deep wound disguised as silence. "I don't know if it's too late," Marcos said, finally looking her in the eyes. I don't know if I've broken you too much. I don't know if I have any credit left to ask you for one more chance. But what I do know," his voice grew steady, with a determination Elena hadn't heard from him in years, "is that I don't want to be that man anymore. I don't want our children to grow up seeing what I saw, and I don't want to lose you." He paused. "I see you, Elena. Today, from that mountain, I saw you for the first time in a very long time. And what I saw broke my heart in the best possible way." Elena looked at him for a long moment. She looked at his tired eyes, his trembling hands, his face marked by 3 days of wind and mountain and truth. And she saw something she had been searching for years. She saw the man she had loved, not restored, not perfect, not completely healed, but present, for the first time in a very long time, completely present. Love is not rebuilt in a single night. Elena knew that, and Marcos learned it too. The months that followed were not easy. There were difficult conversations, nights filled with doubt, moments when the weight of all those silent years pressed down like a debt that neither of them quite knew how to repay. Marcos started therapy, alone at first, then together. It wasn't a pretty or orderly process. There were sessions where both of them walked out of the therapist's office without speaking, each carrying their own revelations like stones too heavy to share just yet. But there was something else, too. There was a night when Marcos came home earlier than expected, walked into the kitchen where Elena was cooking, and without saying a word, put on some music, an old song. One they both knew from when they were young and the world was simpler and love didn't weigh so much. And he asked her to dance right there between the stove and the counter. Elena laughed, a surprised, genuine laugh, the kind that escapes without permission and tastes like freedom. And as they danced clumsily in that small kitchen, with the rice about to overcook and the children shouting from the bedroom, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt chosen. There was a morning when Marcos woke up before her, made coffee, and sat on the edge of the bed, simply watching her sleep. When Elena opened her eyes and found him there, she asked what he was doing. He smiled, making up for lost time. There was an afternoon when their oldest son, who was 9 years old, came running in from the garden with a scraped knee and eyes full of tears. And Marcos, instead of saying, "It's not a big deal," as he would have done before, knelt down in front of him, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Tell me where it hurts." Elena watched from the window, and she cried. But this time it was a different kind of crying. Not the cry of a woman who feels invisible, not the cry of someone who turns on the faucet so no one will hear her. It was the cry of someone who sees with her own eyes that the change is real, that the person she loved hadn't disappeared, that he had simply been lost, and that sometimes, just sometimes, lost people find their way back home. 1 year after that November night, Elena and Marcos returned to the mountain, together this time. They climbed slowly, hand in hand, in silence. But it was a completely different silence from the one they had lived with for years. Not the silence of abandonment or indifference. It was the silence of two people who no longer need to fill the air with words, because they feel safe in each other's presence. When they reached the summit, they sat down on the same rock where Marcos had cried alone 12 months before. They looked out over the valley below, and Marcos took her hand, brought it to his lips, and said, "Thank you for not giving up." Elena looked at him. She thought about all those bathrooms with the water running, all those nights staring at the ceiling, all the times she had almost let go. And she answered with the simplest and most profound truth she knew. I didn't give up on myself either, and that was the most important thing of all. The wind moved through her hair. The sun fell over the valley, and for the first time in a very long time, Elena felt no cold. Elena and Marcos's story is not a story of villains or victims. It is a story of two people who loved each other, but who had never been taught how to love each other well. And perhaps that is the most human thing of all. Because how many of us have been in that bathroom with the water running, sleeping in silence so no one would hear us? How many of us have slept next to someone and felt completely alone? How many of us have loved with everything we had and received only silence in return? And how many of us, deep down, are still waiting for something to change? If this story touched your heart, it's because something in it felt familiar. Don't ignore that feeling, that recognition you feel right now, that small pressure in your chest. That image that crossed your mind while you were listening is your own story asking for your attention. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be chosen. You deserve a love that doesn't make you cry alone in the dark. If you made it to the end of this story, it means you are someone who feels deeply and loves completely. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the words we cannot say ourselves are spoken for us by a story. Leave me a comment with just one word that describes what you felt. Just one, because I genuinely want to know how this story landed in your heart. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. Every week we bring stories like this one, written for the people who feel too much in a world that feels too little. And one last thing. If Elena's story made you reflect on your own relationship, or if you know someone who is living with that silence on the inside without knowing how to break it, there's an ebook in the description of this video. It's not a manual with cold instructions. It has no magic formulas. It is an honest guide, written from the soul, for those who feel that the love they give deserves to be met with the same intensity. Sometimes we just need someone to tell us, clearly and with kindness, what we already know but are afraid to face. That ebook can be that someone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for still believing that real love, the kind that is built, repaired, and chosen every single day, still exists. Until the next story.